How does your relationship differ to the trumpet now that you can do it on your own terms?
It is different. Of course, the repertoire is different. I'll get out excerpts and play them for fun still occasionally, you know, but doing other projects that are non-orchestral is, it's just different. I can't explain it. You know, again, when you're in a room doing your own thing, you're your own boss. And in orchestra, you have to kind of negotiate with what's going around you, and with the conductor, you know, that's how that is. So it is quite a bit different.
Tell me a little bit about the concept of the Bach Book. I love the Bach Book in terms of, well, first of all, it's nice to have music of that caliber that we could perform with other musicians.
Mm-hmm.
It's also nice as a trumpet player to have a Bach-themed book that you could actually perform. There are some Bach books out there where the idea of actually getting on a stage and performing them, it's not quite going to work.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Maybe you could tell me a little bit about your ideas behind it.
Well, my idea was when I retired, I started looking back to earlier things I did before orchestra. And when I was in college, I looked for these books that have Bach that you can play. And at that time, there wasn't a lot. And the ones that did exist were kind of not set up for trumpet very well. So I recorded these things and started editing these pieces, and it kind of grew and grew. And I gave them to Jeremy, who is the Editions Bim person now, who runs it. And I did one piece, the air on a G string, the third suite melody, and it doesn't sound good with just trumpet, you know, because it's just like da forever, da da da, you know, it just didn't work.
Right.
So I asked my wife, who's a bass player, retired also. She retired at the same time I did from the Utah Symphony. If she would just play the bass line. And we did that, and I sent it in to Jeremy. He says, "Oh, do more of that." So I thought I had the book finished, you know, and I didn't. So we added so now I think maybe a third of the book is with a bass line instrument. And it doesn't have to be string bass. It can be bassoon or trombone or, you know, anything you want. And so it's kind of duets. And then there's a couple pieces that are more like trios for two trumpets and a bass line. So basically the concept is trumpet alone on some of them, and then some of them have a bass line. And it's all just great music. And that's the main concept of the book, is that for me, it's kind of like playing etudes to a certain degree, but you're practicing etudes that are just great music. And Bach, you know, just how he can turn a melody and turn the phrase and turn all the just the notes, the way they line up, everything is just like great, you know, and you'll play it and you can play it 100 times and I don't get tired of it, you know. So it was basically just out of love for Bach, basically. That's why I did it, you know.
The selections that you chose are all fantastic, not only because they're playable and they're wonderful, but there's something that lends themselves well to the trumpet just in and of itself. Thinking about these particular selections, how did you go about choosing them?
Well, some of them, I look back, there was a book by Gisandi when I was in college. It was a book, an edition from the 50s, and some were in that. Some were, you know, I have friends who play cello, and I go hear them play the suites, you know, and I think, well, what would work for trumpet? And actually, I think my favorite things from the book are the solo cello works. There's a lot from the first suite and some from the second suite. And they're just, I mean, you just don't get music written for trumpet generally like that. And then sometimes I just, you know, when Jeremy said, well, add some more. And so I just kind of listened on YouTube and got a few ideas there. Most specifically, there's the first piece is for two trumpets and bass, and it's from a cantata, and it's Bach's first cantata. Now, I don't know if it's actually his first that he wrote, but it's his first numbered BWV Cantata Number 1. And I said, well, that's going to be great. You start from the very, very beginning, and it works great. It just I think it's a neat piece, you know. And again, I just, you know, when you edit and it's such great music, it's like it's kind of comes along to you easy. It's easy for you to do in a certain degree, except for like if you have something that's just not trumpet playable, you know, that's the only problem. But you know, it's really great just to be around Bach, basically.
It's really wonderful how you prepared this. You have a solo trumpet book, which is wonderful. You have a second trumpet book, which has a couple duets, and then the bass book. But then you also provide files where people could play along with the bass parts, with the other trumpet part, or they could just listen to you play. What was the process like recording these?
Well, again, I have to credit Jeremy Mate for the idea of adding more bass, you know. But for me, and I can walk up and show you, I have a couple mics in my trumpet studio and my laptop, and so I just started recording up there. Now, and how that actually originally happened, how it kind of made me think about this initially is I took a half of a year leave of absence right before I retired. And part of that leave of absence with Utah Symphony is that you have to have a project, you know, an enriching project. So this is really enriching, you know. So I started it up there, and then kind of I went back to Symphony and started working there again. And then when I retired, I returned to this project. And so the actual recording of it is I just sit down and I'd usually have 2 or 3 I was working on at one time, at the most. And so I'd be kind of working on these. And then when I got ready to do one, I would record up in my studio. The ones with the bass line, my wife would come in afterwards and put down a bass line that would work to my audio. And so, like you say in this book, part of the book that's interesting about it is there's a bass line you can play with. There's a click track going to it, and then you can start with the bass and play a duet with a bass. And there's Leon Chodos, who's a bassoon player in the orchestra, does a couple of bassoon parts, and that's fun with playing with him too. So, but it's all they added it after you know, they did the hard part. They had to kind of adjust to me. And when I originally recorded some of the things, I wasn't anticipating adding a second line, so I didn't put a click track or anything, so it kind of made it extra hard for them, you know, because it's amazing what you do, you know, when you don't have a click track, or what you don't do, you know.
When Jeremy gave me a couple of previews and samples of this,
yeah,
I found myself trying to play along and trying to play these things, and it's just nice to be able to play with people of that caliber is extra special.
Well, good. So do you have the book? Have you played it with it?
Jeremy, he sent me the digital files so that I could familiarize myself with them.
Right.
All of the sound things are now on SoundCloud.
Right, yeah, I knew that, yeah.
So I've gone to SoundCloud and I've played along, and, you know, I was doing my research. It's very fulfilling to be able to be in your room and to play with a world-class caliber bassist or bassoonist and play this unbelievable material, and the music is impeccably edited. It's beautiful. It's a great presentation. I can't help but wonder, your background is a very unique background in that you grew up in a very small town in Texas.
Right.
Your mother, she was a choir director in a church.
Correct.
Did she have any role in introducing you to this music?
You know, it's a small town, like you said, and they didn't. I don't know if I ever heard Bach in the church there. It's more, you know, it's more gospel, basically.
Really?
My stepfather was in a gospel quartet, you know, and they would get to our house and stand around the piano, and they'd sing these gospel quartets. And that's what I heard my mom would play piano. So I didn't hear Bach as far as the church scene, you know. I did play some Bach when I went off to college in Austin. That's where I was first really exposed to it. And my mother would take me to concerts in the bigger cities, and I would hear things there. But as for a small town, the town is Rusk, Texas. It's not even with that modifier. It's music was important, you know, And the band director was good. My mother was the choir director in church and at high school. Uh, it was a good background for me to love music. It's just you didn't get exposed to the larger works of Bach or Handel or anybody like that, too much.
How was the trumpet introduced to you?
When I don't know, I was probably 7 or 8, and I got one of these little plastic trumpets with 4 valves, and each valve had a note, and you could play taps, and that kind of thing. And so when I was 10, my brother decided he wanted to try band. And so maybe it was 9. I think it was 9. Anyway, my mom went out and found a cornet. I remember going with her. It was called a Pan American. It was the brand, Pan American. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but and it was she got it was $35. I remember that. And so my brother was playing in the band, and we lived near the town square. And the band director, Lester Hughes, who was a very good band director, he would have the kids go out and march around the square. And obviously they're playing the music, the marching music. And my brother, he's more football player, and so I don't know if he's into it anyway. But he'd come home, and I could hear them play, and I would pick it out once he got home. I'd pick it out on the cornet, and it really bummed him out that I could play it and he couldn't, So that's kind of the first time I ever played trumpet, was sharing it with my brother, And then we entered high school. Well, we entered junior high then in the 6th grade is when we started, in Rusk.
Did you have any trumpet lessons in middle school and high school?
There was a teacher at Stephen F. Austin University. He was named Albert Moore, and he was from Minnesota, I think, originally. But anyway, he gave me a few lessons. My cousin never gave me lessons, but another thing you hear is that he lived a block further from the square, and he is maybe 4 or 5 years older than me, 6, I can't remember, and he still plays. But his name is Dennis Dotson. He's a very well-known jazz player. So I would walk by his street, and I could hear him playing all day. I mean, he was a practicer. It was unbelievable. And so I was influenced a little bit, knowing that somebody can make a living. When he went on, he made a living. He played with Woody Herman in Vegas and all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of good to know that you can play trumpet for a living. So that was a bit of an influence. But other than that, I'm trying to think of anybody else. I don't think I took lessons per se, except for the band director helping me. And so then after that, I ended up at the University of Texas, which I had a very good experience there. I was able to study with Frank Elsas, who was part of the Goldman Band, a soloist. And that's really old history for our folks now, I'm sure. But it was a really important part of the trumpet development and music development. Bands used to be much more common and important than symphony orchestras in America. And at that time, being in the Goldman Band was like one of the really good jobs, but he was good in getting the basics down, basically, etudes, playing with phrasing, just regular, things that you need to do. And I have not had a weekly regiment like that before. So he was great.
Were there some aha moments that helped motivate you into moving towards the performance end of the profession?
Yeah, I don't know about moments, but some of the graduate students, they wanted to be in an orchestra, and and also brass quintet was really big, and we had a brass choir who was Wayne Barrington, the horn teacher there, very fine musician. He played in the Chicago Symphony and was I think played in Los Angeles Phil. And anyway, he did the brass ensemble, and just being around, okay, he's in an orchestra. Wow, he was great, and the graduate students were interested in orchestra. And then the orchestra was good, and so that just kind of made me want to do it all of a sudden. Like, well, I don't want to teach, I want to play.
How did you transition from Dr. Elsas's studio into Mr. Crisara's?
Well, I was about out of school. I just took from him at the very end. I was teaching, and actually part of the time I for 2 years I taught at Amarillo College right after graduation, and I studied with Crisara during that time, like in the summer, and he. It was interesting. Elsass and Crisara being New Yorkers and having that scene, but decades apart. But they had some mutual respect. I think maybe, I don't know if Dr. Elsass had anything to do with him coming, but I remember him being very happy about the selection. Crisara, he's just the ultimate studio, all around orchestral, everything New York player. He played in the NBC Orchestra, and he did just all sorts of things, and so it was great to have him come into the school there.
One of the stories that I actually knew about you before reading about it in your bio is that you wanted to study with Tom Stevens, and you called the school in advance after I think you got in already to the school.
Yeah.
And they said, "Oh, well, Tom doesn't teach here anymore." So
Right.
plans, but then you met Tony Plogue, or you heard
Right.
him, and almost sight unseen, you're back into the USC trumpet studio.
Right. Sight unseen for Tony, actually, because I mean, I'd seen his records before, and he was doing a concert at Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas. And so I went to see that. And I'd already given up the USC thing. I said, well, I'm not going to go there, but I'm going to go hear him play. And I don't think I even knew he taught at USC. And so I went and heard him, and it was great. So I went backstage and said, hey, I was going to go to USC. Will you teach me? And he said, yeah, why not? And so it ended up being the greatest lucky thing that ever happened to me, pretty much musically, I think, because he has been really a mentor for me.
What did you feel like you got most from his teaching at USC?
He was a well-rounded player. He knew how to treat people. Again, I really kind of had an attitude like you. I got to be a dude. I got to be, play trumpet and really, I want to, kind of beat everybody or something like that. I was just a kid, but he really, he's a humanitarian. He is just a true good person. And I think that's what I needed. It made me relax and kind of remember why you're playing music. It's because it's beautiful. It's high art. It's just, it's a thing that's of good in the world now, and so, and he helped me with all my basics too. It was just an all-around experience with him. And so when I'd studied with him that year, and I got this job in Utah, it was really, and actually getting in the job here at the audition, I didn't have a good resume and I wasn't accepted to the audition. And so he wrote the personnel manager and said, accept me. And so I wouldn't even have gotten in if it wasn't for him.
Tell me a little bit about transitioning from second trumpet to the principal trumpet role.
It was a big transition. In a way, I think I'm made more for second trumpet, the way I play. I like listening and following and trying to solve the puzzle of playing with somebody. I like it. And I never, so anyway, it was a change, but in a way it almost seemed, at least at the beginning, almost easier for me, because I played. I was very lucky that the conductor at that time, Joseph Silverstein, liked the way I played. He was sort of a very classical oriented, very classical, and like Beethoven and Brahms, that kind of thing. And he wasn't. We did modern pieces, but not a lot of like super high energy, crazy stuff. And so I was well suited for him. And so it ended up being really, really a nice experience.
You're one of the few people who has made his career in an American orchestra who actually got the experience of playing for a little bit in a European orchestra. You played principal in Malmo for a limited amount of time.
Mhm.
What was the perceived differences between playing in an American ensemble and in a European one?
Some of it was just the structure of the orchestra, and this may not be such an interesting thing musically, but the orchestra musicians seemed in Sweden run the orchestra more than the management or the conductor, especially. They tend to hire the musicians, have a committee. They hire the conductors generally. The management works for them, and it's sort of a different thing. We have a great management here in Utah too, but I mean, it was just the musicians made, I think, more decisions there. But it was a good experience. I played in a good section. Boo Nielsen was second trumpet, and Shaloka Peterson was another player that's very good there.
You mentioned that your time there you got into Baroque performance practice. Tell me
Mhm.
a little bit about studying Baroque performance practices, and also does that inform how you look at this Bach book?
It definitely informs me how, even though the trumpet's role in Baroque music is not exactly what it is in this Bach book, but it totally informed me on how to play a phrase and how to use or not use vibrato, how to articulate. It Part of it actually going back to Tony. He taught at Ed Tarr's school in Basel, Switzerland for a year, and he kind of got the bug, and he did a lot of natural trumpet work with European orchestras. So I kind of got some of it from him. I got some of it from, like I mentioned, Leif Bengtsson and Andreas were very active in the scene, and then I started reading some books. You know, uh, I'm trying to remember the name of the one by Thurston Dart or Donington. I think they're kind of books that folks read now. But anyway, I read some books on it and just kind of started doing it. And I started a little Baroque orchestra here in Utah that was nice and fun and successful, and it was a good learning experience.
One of the things I was thinking about when I started to look through your book, and it really got my imagination, is every time a big soloist comes and performs with an orchestra,
Mm-hmm.
they always give a great encore. And I can't tell you how many times I sat and listened to a great soloist just play, just almost nonchalantly, this
Yeah.
Bach offering, and I would think, oh, I wish I had something like that. And now you can take this book, you can offer it to a bassoonist or to a bass player and ask, I'd like to do this as an encore. Would you mind joining me? And
Yeah.
you get this. I don't know if you felt this way in your capacity as trumpet in the orchestra, but I always thought that the encore, the Bach encore that the soloist gave, was this moment of tranquility. Before you had to play something that took a lot of your energy, you had this moment of tranquility.
Right. I totally agree with you. The encores, and I don't know why that is. I'm just thinking while you're talking here. It may be that a soloist comes in, as you know, and maybe goes through the piece once or twice with you, and that's it, and then you perform. Uh, Whereas when they come in and they play their encore, it's something they've probably been playing for decades, and it's just close to their heart, and they can play it. And most of these people are just insanely good. And it does often seem to be the highlight for me as a listener. I totally agree with you. And often it was Bach.
I'm really glad that this book has gotten the publication from Editions Bim. I think it's going to be received really well for the reasons that we just talked about. I think people want really beautiful, perfect music to play, and you presented it in a way that it's playable, it's approachable, and you could do it with other people. And I'm actually very grateful for this offering.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I hope it does give joy to folks who play it. It's a challenge, but it's worth it.